Welcome to DPS Stories, the podcast where we sit down with real members of Team DPS and tell their story of how they got to DPS and how they're making DPS a better place. Joining us today, we have a child's right advocate and middle school teacher from Kunsmiller Creative Arts Academy, Ken Connelly. Welcome to the show, Ken.
Thank you for having me.
Normally we intro our guests, but we discovered your story through a nomination for the Denver Public Schools. We call it the P Stories campaign. And your nomination was so powerful. I'm hoping you'll read it to intro yourself today.
Sure thing. I am dyslexic. To start, my wife put me up to this. She always puts me up to this because she knows I kind of tend to take a backseat. So passion is more than a desire. It is pushing yourself beyond your limits and sacrificing in the face of adversity, not for self, but for others. I'm not afraid of being forgotten or fading away. I'm afraid of not making a difference in others or being apathetic to what is needed. I'm a high school dropout. My last completed year was 8th grade. I missed nearly 2 months of 9th and a third of 10th grade. I was held back twice. We moved a lot. There were times we stood in food lines, lived in motels, campgrounds, and with family. I attended 27 schools before finally dropping out. I'm the first person to graduate college, and my kids are the first to graduate high school, and both now have college degrees. My childhood was even a stranger twist. When I was 7 years old, October 10th, 1980, my father kidnapped my brother and me. We were taken for over 3 years. 3 years, 2 months, 18 days. There were a number of close call manhunts for my father. When they caught him, we were living in an 1840s farmhouse with little to no utilities. I had a severe stutter, speech impediment, and Tourette's. At that time, there was little in the way of helping my mother or us in physical, mental, and emotional recovery after being recovered. I fell through every crack in the school system as we moved multiple times a year. Due to the level of poverty, I started working full-time and paying rent the day I turned 13. By the time I dropped out, I had over 4 years of full-time work experience. I would eventually earn my GED and join the Army. Later, after spending my 20s working various jobs, I used my GI Bill and my Veterans Affairs benefits. I learned at 37 that I was dyslexic and not as stupid or dumb as I had been told. I would go on to earn multiple degrees and become a teacher. I earned an associate's degree, a bachelor's degree, a master's in arts, a master's in education, 2 postgraduates, and roughly a third postgraduate. Since 2006, I have been a national speaker and advocate for children's rights, child abuse and neglect, and ending child abduction. I wrote a nonfiction book about my experience as a kidnapped child in 2009. I've co-authored another book in 2011 and have been involved with nonprofits that work to end various child rights issues. I have co-wrote state and federal bills, testified in court cases, helped create national curriculum, and lobbied at the state, federal, and international level. Being a teacher is my greatest accomplishment. I always revered teachers. My favorite teacher was Mr. Carpenter. Mr. C was my general ed teacher in 5th grade. He taught me not to let others bully me over my speech and tics. He made me feel normal. He taught me that to treat everyone with respect and never prejudge. I went through voc rehab for the military to become a teacher. Teaching, mentoring, creating programs, and leading others in education has been my greatest honor. My only regret, I wish I became a teacher 30 years ago.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's when our team read that, we were stunned by your story. You experienced a childhood that most people can't imagine. And I think working in education, everyone is always so surprised by how resilient kids are. But I'm curious to know, how did you cope as a young person with the early events of your life?
During the abduction, you learn to want to protect my father, so no one know, because he was wanted. He had another name, was wanted, to the point that I remember walking down an alleyway. We're taught to walk behind alleyways, not in the main street. I had a cop stop me. He was actually looking for me, and they got in the heads up we were in the area. And I was able to talk myself out of it because of just the fear of what would happen. But for me, I learned to survive. I learned to put emotions in how I felt on the side. I didn't cry from the day after I was kidnapped until my daughter was born. I mean, I just bawled I just bawled the day my daughter was born. And, really, I just survived. I buried myself in music. I play multiple instruments. I love to write. I found ways there to go inward to live. Makes sense?
Yeah. I'm happy to hear that you have those creative outlets. I feel like those can be so beneficial. Oh, yes. Sorry. We just got a note from the team over here. We didn't introduce Bishop. So sorry.
No worries.
We've got Bishop Connelly here with us as well.
So this is Bishop. He is a giant schnauzer. His father was the last one to come out of Ukraine. His mother came from Mexico City. He's been with me since he was 11 weeks old. He's been in school since he was 4.5 months old. And everywhere I go, he goes. He's my service dog. And he's pretty much the mascot at every school we go to. Doesn't matter how kind of day you're having, he comes up, leans in you if he knows you're stressed. Or if a kid's having a bad day, doesn't matter how angry they are, he puts his head on their lap. And so, yes, so this year he's in 6th grade class, and they absolutely adore him.
Yeah, he's got a very calming energy.
Thank you. He's always like this. Unless, he's out of his harness at home, then he's just a big kid.
Yeah.
But yes, he's
done with his 9 to 5 at that point.
Yes. So thank you.
Yes. Okay. So welcome, Bishop. But early events of your childhood, I'm so happy that you have kind of creative outlets that you're able to go inward and just kind of have that peace, because I imagine that's a hard thing to find even in the present moment.
True.
After returning from being abducted, what do you remember most about trying to assimilate to your normal life or normal life?
It was a contrast. One moment we're living in basically an abandoned farmhouse. I'm using an outhouse, almost still running water. Pretty bad condition. I was covered in chiggers and body lice, and thought my mother was dead. It was a crazy situation, big police chase. And you go from that in the court, and then you're on a plane. I actually had like a SWAT team take my dad down in the courtroom, and then they rushed us out to the airport. And you all of a sudden you're back home with family you haven't seen in 3+ years, you thought didn't exist no more, and there's news cameras in your face. And so really, it was a big shock because it was my mom. My mom was there. I remember I got to brush her hair the first time. I was like, I remember you, and small things. It was, in many ways, everybody knew who you were. And then all of a sudden you have to be part of life. Going through that, you just, like, I see for me, I just sort of buried myself in books and reading and writing and so forth. And, and again, there wasn't a lot for parents back then. So my mother, she was not in the best relationship. Her husband didn't understand why all that had happened. In fact, my dad took us because she got remarried on the day she got married. And so there's a lot of instability moving around and just a time period. And there wasn't a lot of counseling in the schools. The early 80s was not a fun time for being a kid. I'm a proud Gen Xer, but I really had to learn to kind of stand up, take a punch, give it. And I guess you describe that time was just basically trying to find my place as an 11-year-old.
Were you able to do that? Were you able to find a community of people who accepted you? I
was, but they weren't probably the best. The best community. I got in a lot of trouble. I was stealing. I could hotwire a car when I was 12, 13. I probably have the best group of friends. I'm quite sure. But they still cared about me for who I was. So yeah, I can say I have my friends, but I would not recommend to others the friends I had back then.
Friends are still important, even if they're not the best influences.
Yes,
but
I got suspended a lot.
Yes. In your nomination, you talked about falling through the cracks in the educational system quite a bit. What did life look like for you as a student?
We moved around a lot. Again, there wasn't a lot of stability back then for parents when they'd had their kids taken, and that's a big, huge issue. A lot of psychology in that in general, and so because of that, both my parents are dropouts. My mom was a waitress, so we moved for work, and we moved who could help us. And so as a student, I was probably no more in a school with the most maybe 4 months ever.
Wow.
I went to 8 junior highs, 4 high schools, and then a slew of elementary schools. School was, if you were in California 1 month, you're in Texas the next month, and you're somewhere else the next month, or wherever it is, I was either ahead on a subject or I was behind on a subject. Then, of course, being undiagnosed dyslexic and something called dyscalculia, which is math dyslexia, I was never in school long enough to get the help I needed.
Yeah.
And then back then, there weren't the laws in place that we have now. So as an educator, we can look for certain signs and step in. Back then it was, well, this kid's not going to be here very long, so on to the next. And that was pretty much the way things continually worked. I remember being 13, working full time, and my teachers never saying, the kid's working 40 hours a week. Maybe this shouldn't be going on. It was just, okay.
It's crazy knowing now how that's a red flag on a red flag on a red flag.
It is.
Back then, it just was your norm.
And to the point of I remember the moment as an educator, and I use educator over teachers because I'm a very proud educator. I remember realizing, oh my gosh, that kid in my class is me. And seeing it and going and telling my wife, her mother was a teacher and school counselor. I'm married to family teachers, and I'm like, yeah, and we all know this. And you tend to kind of go, was it really that bad? And so as an educator, I'm always ever mindful of who's in my class, who's around, even other fellow educators, to say, okay, what's going on in their life? What do they need from me? And it might not be the same thing as me, but they need something. And so I would say that the falling through the cracks it's why I'm in education. And to the point of the year always starts with me for the first week of the school year and the last week of the school year, I play Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd. And it's my way to tell myself, too, working home from work, I don't want to be the teacher I had. I want to be the teacher that I need to be for other students. And I constantly go back and tell myself that. And that's just kind of that, we call it rebellious nature. But I need to be for my students something they might not have.
You're stinging it to the man in the most positive way possible.
Oh, very much so.
And I do want to talk about, you did have, it sounds like, one incredible teacher in your life, Mr. C.
I did.
And it sounds like that's not your own namesake now, but you are a Mr. C to an extent.
I am Mr. C because of him. I get real emotional over this. When I was returned, we were living in Tracy, California, and Mr. C was a 6'6", super tall guy. And every day he had a word in Spanish for you to learn, and he was just this big, huge, monster-looking guy that would get on the floor and he asked how you're doing. And when I was getting picked on for stuttering or making a twitch in my face, he would laugh it off oh, I can do that too, and we all do, and making it kind of normal. And he was Mr. C, and there's more to his story in general. But I remember that when I first got into education and I became a first para, I got asked to say, what you want to be called by? And I was like, called by? They're like, yeah. I said, Mr. C. And, really it's because of Mr. Carpenter, I use the name Mr. C. We're always paying it forward. And so I think many times that what he did for me is lived through the people I've been able to affect in and out of education. So I'm very proud and very humble to be Mr. C.
Yeah. What do you remember most about your time in his classroom?
Learning Spanish. That it was more of a feeling. It was a feeling of, I was playing a few times ever in my life, and when I was in school, where I felt like I belonged. I felt like I had a group of friends that I became friends with while I was living there. But just, it was very his warmth. He was a very caring person, and you felt it. And I wasn't the best student, You know, I've been bounced around and moved, and half the time I knew my name was. Sometimes it seemed like I would answer, you know, different in general. And he, for me, what he left with me was the impression that he cared. And that's what, for me, I'm not desperate for it, because as an educator, you know, we're not our students' friends, but I need to make sure that I am providing that for my students, and again, for the staff that I serve when I'm in that role. So that's what I carry most from him, you know.
And what a beautiful thing that is. Do you think that at any point while you were a student in his classroom, you, like, the seed was planted that you could be an educator, or did that not come until later?
No, not at all. And to the point of, I hated teachers. I mean, I just would not be in school. I didn't care. My whole family are dropouts, and school's not important. I remember being, from 13 on, you can drop out, you can drop out, you can drop out. And we all worked for our hands. We all did construction work. We all, you know, worked out hard. So education wasn't valued. And so it wasn't. And I'll tell you where it came from was, I was doing a side job. I was taking pictures at a school, doing some sports stuff on the side. And I walked past a teacher's classroom. I heard her saying grammar, Grammer. And I was like, just 2 A's in there. And she's like, Holly, you're right. You know, I kind of stood there and I watched that teacher kind of teach. And then later a few times in the different buildings, taking pictures and seeing teachers in that position. And it was just like, I mean, it's like they loved their students. It wasn't this what I was used to. And I wanted to have something similar to that. And so when I married my wife, we'd talk, I'd say, I think I'd like to be a teacher. You know, I didn't think anything beyond that, you know, and I can sit and say in many ways, as an educator, it's been an evolution, even internally, in why I'm an educator and why I'm going to do this. But at first, oh no, not at all. I mean, I learned to weld. My hand was mangled in an accident. I never once, I mean, I've done so many different things in my life, but teaching, I was like, I'm not a teacher. I'm trouble, you know. And the short story is, I called my old school in West Texas, and I said, hey, guess what? Hey, coach, you know, I said, I'm in education. And he's like, oh, are you a custodian? Well, no, I'm a teacher. And he goes, oh, you passed a background check? Yes, sir. It's one of the Connelly boys. Yes, sir. Well, good luck. And he hung up on me, you know, and I was like, oh. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to be better than him. Yeah. And so I guess for me, being a teacher is almost like, kind of like you said, sticking it to the man. It's, I feel like I'm a good teacher. I want to be a good teacher. I want to be a good educator.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Tell me about, because you did drop out of school. Tell me about the journey of when you dropped out of school to how you ended up taking educational courses to become a teacher. I know that's a lot to cover, but
no. So I first used my GI Bill after I got my hand crushed. I used my GI Bill to become a firefighter paramedic, West Texas, and love doing that. Do some other injuries. You know, when you have a hard life, you tend to do hard things to get more injured. And so when I got divorced and I was getting remarried, I met my wife. We got engaged, and her mother was a counselor. She was getting her MBA. Family were very successful in that sense. And her dad said, if you want to marry my daughter, you got to get a college degree. And I looked him dead in the eyes and I said, sir, I said, I'm not that smart. But he said, you're going to do it if you want to marry my daughter. So I promised. And so the initial thing was, I tried VOTEC schooling. I went to a junior college in Dallas Community College District. I got academically suspended in 2005, you know, right? And I went back. I tried going to IIT. I was always trying to get back in that. And then eventually I was in my associates, taking classes at a junior college and a regular college, UT Dallas. And I had a professor say, I think you're dyslexic. And we spent $1,200. We paid for the test, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. And it was, you're not stupid, you're not dumb.
How did it feel at that point to have someone say those things where it's like, you might have thought this your entire life, but now it's actually this entire other thing that's out of your control. You're not dumb. You can read. It's just that you need other assistance.
I will say it was like winning the lottery, or in some ways almost like with my wife saying she wanted to marry me, because I truly believed I was not as smart, as a dumb person. I got called dumb and stupid by my teachers. Make you stand up in class and make you read, and of course you're stuttering through everything and the words jumping around. I really thought I was not a smart person. So to have someone say, it's not you, and then to turn right around, complete my associates in a year, my bachelor's in 2 years, a master's in a year. It was like, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And in fact, my book was actually published before my first semester back in college.
Wow.
And I kind of left some mistakes in the book because I wanted to show the transition, even in the writing, as a dyslexic. And, but it was something where it was like, as my mother told me, because my father-in-law has passed away now, she said, he was always proud of you. And he kept saying, he can stop anytime he wants. He's done this,
He
But,
wanted you to get one degree.
Yeah, and one more, and
bam,
one more.
Bam, bam.
And it really was feeling like winning the lottery. I say this all the time, that my 30s was like a rebirth, and and finding value in myself, that I mattered, choosing relationships that weren't based upon just being used. It all goes back together, it all stems back into that. And my wife and I talking, and she's like, "Why do you want to walk for your associates?" And I says, "It's just an associates." And walking for my associates, and then I can do this, and then walking for my bachelor's, and then I got in the master's program, and then we moved to Montana. I was like, I want to be a teacher. It just was like, I'm very goal orientated, and I'm very competitive in the sense of survival. Mm-hmm. So I'm never going to fail. I'm always going to push harder. And education has become that place where I found myself, you know.
That's such a beautiful thing.
Thank you.
How does that momentum and that drive that you found for yourself impact your teachings in the classroom?
I'm always mindful that I have students that are me, that I have super smart, highly intelligent, we call it GT, gifted and talented, students that were like me, struggle to read and write, move around a lot, grew up, maybe living in a car, So if you're ever in my room, I'm covered in music posters and movies, and I have all kinds of bobblehead. My room looks like an eclectic storm hit it. I had guitars and my saxophone. I'm always like, "Oh, what's your interest? Oh, I have this. I'll pull a book out." So for me in the classroom, it's really like finding your interest and then perking it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, for me, the fun part. It's almost like being a first grade teacher, but in a middle school, high school setting.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I mean, I would almost say that you're playing like an investigative detective almost. Like, to be able to find what makes a student light up is a skill set in of its own.
And the thing is, I always, at the end of the year, I have a yearbook for every year I've been in education. There's always students like, "I hate you," and they yell at you. I've told kids, you can push me, you can spit on me, you can cuss me out, do it to me and not to the other teachers. And I hate you. And at the end of the year, I have a student that's taken up an entire page in my yearbook, how much I meant to them. And those are what I live for. So during the year, as an educator, we have hard times. It's a grind sometimes. But then those kids are like, "You coming back next year? You're going to be here? Don't leave." So I live for that. That's the carryover, and I'm in that peak now. I'm starting to see that change with students, and she's not so mean after all, that's just rigid. I could do this to the day I die, just to know that I made an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm sure too, being in the school setting, the kids talk to each other. So I'm sure the word's starting to get out where it's like the older kids, they're like, "Oh, Mr. C, like, you got a good one." They're spreading the word that maybe at first they were a little distrustful, but I'm sure now you've established the reputation that you're.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And of course, now being in Denver public schools, you have to re-establish yourself, And it's just something, like I say, I learned the first time I got in education. I was over different CT programs. And I walked into the Law Academy program, and there's my website and there's my book. And I'm like, "Oh," I walked out, and the teacher's like, "No, come in." And over that course, that first year, I began realizing kids look you up. And then they're like, "Is this you? Is this you?" "Yes, it is." And I always ask questions, and I'd say in many ways because, and I work in this for every single teacher, but for myself, this is who I am. You need to know that I'm not perfect and I make a lot of mistakes. But by doing that, it's really given me the ability to show students a human side to educators. And maybe that's all I do in the school in the end. But with everybody else I work with, you just kind of able to kind of create that community.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's something I love doing.
Do you think you've had any sort of future educator sitting in your classroom who doesn't fit the traditional teacher mold?
I have. I've had about 4 of them, and every time was they're like, "I'm going to become an educator, not going to become a teacher," and oh, really, yeah, like why? Because you brought history alive, or you taught English or science, whatever it is, you brought it alive, and I understand it now. Or so that's been kind of cool, you know. And then some of my student teachers, I often have taught student teachers, and then they're like, "Well, I was going to go this direction, but I could do it this way." Oh, you could. And so that's been a lot of fun just to kind of see them either if they're when they go become a teacher, really begin to see the profession differently, or if they haven't, go, well, I'm not a stupid person. I'm actually pretty smart, and I could have my own class too, you know?
Yeah.
So that's a great feeling.
To see them become their own person, regardless of whatever path they choose. Like, that's so cool to know that you had a hand in it and how rewarding that must feel.
It is. And to the point, I have to make a little shout out. My 6th grade homeroom class is like, you're going to mention us, right? So I do want to make it very clear to my students, a shout out to 6th grade homeroom at Kunsmiller.
Yeah, 6th grade homeroom at
Mr. C's
Kunsmiller.
class. Bishop's right there. So yeah, I've been doing this since the 2014-2015 school year, and it's been amazing.
Yeah. Do you have, I mean, this is, I'm sure a question you've gotten plenty of times, but what's your favorite part about being an educator?
When they get ready to graduate, move on next grade, and you see where you can tell them, hey, look what you've done this year, you know, and you're like, you were here. Like right now I'm using a lot of Avid skills for reading, and first part of the year they hated it, and now they're like, Mister, I'm doing this, and I showed my little brother this, and you're like, you know, and again, it goes back to, I should not be this person. I wasn't meant to be this person. Why I always blame myself was I was meant to be in the trash can, to be quite frank. I was worthless. I didn't mean anything. I was nothing. And I tell myself that in the mirror. And now I get to be here on this show, and I get like other stuff I've been able to do, you know, as an advocate and educator, and wow, I can do this, you know. And so it's a blessing. I mean, for me, it really is a blessing. I'm very honored to be an educator. And yeah, I think about it all the time. I'm always like, well, I could leave education and I could do something different, you know, and it always comes back to a kid's smile, you know?
Yeah. When you know it's what you were meant to do, like how could you leave?
Exactly. Yeah.
Before we get to your work as an advocate and an author, I'm curious to know, how did your perception change once you became an educator? You're talking about how you used to say these things to yourself in the mirror, but now you're an educator and you carry yourself differently. What did that change look like?
I think in many ways they're often very gradual. You know, I used to, even before I got an education, I would tell people, let's say, you know, look in the mirror, give yourself 20 things about yourself that you don't like, and go look up the opposite antonym, and then tell yourself in the mirror, and I tell them, you're going to cry. You're going to cry doing it, but be serious. And that path really isn't like jumping, you're there. It's all of a sudden you realize that you are that person. And that's sort of the beauty of it. It's that the beauty of some of the pain I've gone through to get there, but here I am. So I really can't tell you when it was. I remember the first time I had a principal, when we come to his school, and introduced me as, this is Mr. Connelly, he's a master educator. And I was like, I am, you know, like, oh, okay, you know. And that for me is more of I guess I'm really not, I'm pretty good, because I don't see myself that way. In the validation cons, more people that I look up to, that I look as a professional and go, wow, you're really good at what you do, and I want to be like you. And they're like, I wish, you know, whatever it is. And so that's been the transition for me. It's just, again, I'm very proud of being in education because I find value in myself now. And not that I didn't have before, I guess I didn't. It's that the greatest thing I think you can do as an educator, as a person in general, is serve others. I did that in the military, fire, emergency medicine. I've done it in other stuff. At some point, I'll be gone. But like Mr. C, Meister Carpenter, there could be someone out there that I impacted. And what will they do? And for me, that's okay, I have value. You know, I might be a footnote in history.
You're the blip now, but
yes,
the impact
exactly.
is great.
Yes.
Yeah. You've spent years advocating for children's rights. What has been one of the most memorable moments of that work specifically?
I got involved with a group called Back Home, Bring Back Children Home. Specifically, they were a group of parents that had their children that were taken actually to Japan, one of our G8 allies. I've been working on another bill out of Florida and Texas, and through different names, people kind of pass names around and so forth. And we asked to go up to DC and help. So I was working as a copywriter. I was writing the copy. I was doing all the making the videos, green screens, PR work, and just going from Congress room to Congress room and so forth, taking pictures, showing in my book, you need to get behind this particular project. There's my book. And they take it. And then when they later would say, I'm not going to do this, like, poor me. But it was a way to kind of get my foot in the door and really use, not as a victim, but as a survivor, to say I can make a change. And that campaign resulted in all of Japan's, nothing against Japan, or at least not, it was an issue with some of their law. That's all it was. We got all of the other G8 nations to join in, condemning them, and getting a chance to co-write the resolution 1386. And it was the first time the U.S. condemned Japan for human rights violations since the attacks on Pearl Harbor.
Wow. And
to be in the middle of that, we had the Bring Sean Home Foundation involved with us. We were protesting, and international news group was there. You're meeting congressmen and senators and Jim Rand and other ones. And it was overwhelming. But then in the end, we got all but 6 members of Congress to sign this resolution. And on the same day, it was actually the Cherry Blossom Festival. So President Obama was there with the Prime Minister of Japan, and they were celebrating Japan's child rights issues for being great country. And of course, we got Congress doing checks and balances. We got all of Congress, both sides of the aisle, to say, no, we want to see them have some better systems in place. And that was really cool because you're in the middle of it, and I'm in a Suburban, and I've got Chris Savoy and these other people I saw on the news, and just there, we're in the middle of this, and we're just fighting, and we're sleeping on the floor, up all night long. It was it was an amazing process.
Yeah.
I've been called in as an expert on cases, to testify in court cases and structure cases, but that was probably one of my biggest things I got to really participate with and be there. And of course, it's in the metaverse, so you can go out, look on YouTube, it's there. But that was amazing to hear your name being mentioned on international news. You're like,
that's really, you want to talk about impact too.
Yes.
Like impact in the classroom, but then also on the global stage. That's very impressive.
I always tell my students, say, look, whatever you're passionate about, you think that one person can make a difference? Let me show you what you can do. When I got involved in doing this, I'm a member of a group called Take Home. We were the first cases that the National Center for Exploited Children, I always struggle with that word, that name, but I was part of that first group when they were passing these laws and stuff done, and Ken Connelly came in late. But when I began doing this, there had never been a former victim to write a book about their kidnapping from the point of view of a child going through it. And so that really opened a lot of doors, and this really kind of put me out there. Like, everybody looks at everything about you now. They judge everything. But it just, I look back now, I'm like, I can't believe I did that, And more importantly, I can't believe I had the support I had behind me with my wife and her family.
Yeah. What do you think was the biggest challenge of writing your story and also the biggest benefit to writing your story?
I've been writing since I was a kid, poems, music, stories, 300 page, 200 page, fictional stuff, in general. But when it came to this, you have to look at yourself of who you are. You can't just, and we all have this facade of who we are, this kind of this shell that we present, and we kind of believe in, especially when you've been abused, neglected, and things like that. Was kidnapped. You have this other shell. You have to look very invincible, and I always learned to kind of have that stature. But when you're doing this, I'd go into an office in the house. I painted it thunderstorm blue, the walls, the ceiling, and as mentioned in my book, I played Pink Floyd. I played the music that took me back to the kidnapping, that mindset. And it was just writing out things I remembered and then putting them in different chapters, and then going back and have to really think about it, how it impacted me, and then find the emotion side of it, and then have to develop your arc and all your things at the story part of it. It was, what it really was having to force myself to look in the mirror and see that I was still, not say fragile, but I was still vulnerable. And one of the highlights of that later was when I was involved with a psychologist when she was doing her doctoral research. And one of the things they knew was with kids between 7 and 11, that age group, they don't think sequentially.
Interesting.
And so I didn't think sequentially. My memories were scattered, but they were perfect in that sense. And it showed victimization, trauma. And it was only after I had everything laid out, I began looking at dates and places we were at to figure out how to tell the whole story. That was a validation in the sense of my mind, my memory is so, being younger is so scattered and so layered with what's true and the way I try to cope with, to see that they not bear. So that was really hard. My wife told me through the process that even my kids were like, you weren't a nice person, Dad. You were kind of a jerk, because I didn't know how to deal with my emotions. I didn't know how to deal with something so raw because I'm used to burying them. So really the hard part was dealing with, I'm Ken. This is who I am. This is me. And understand too is that's my dad's name. I'm a junior. And I've been pulled out of a car before at gunpoint twice over my name. And check the birthday. So I'm having to even look now. I look at the book and I see my dad's name.
Yeah.
And having to do all that stuff. But the benefit out of it came just when I have a book and I've gone to a library. Oh, there's my book in the library, or things like that. And the other part came out was healing. You learn you're able to, you can deal with certain things. You heal through it.
Yeah. As much as that might be your father's name, it's also your name. And people who don't know that name, they just know you. That's your story now.
Yeah. And that's something that I've over time, I'm 53, I've come to terms with. But those are things that, again, you can take anybody who has had some type of abuse, neglect, trauma. It's never, I always want it to be fixed now. And it's just, again, it's that process. And now when I talk to people and talk to other people, I'm telling them it's a process. It's a process. Again, be truthful to yourself. Be honest to yourself. Never quit and never say no. I've been very fortunate when I got into child abduction and advocacy work. I had an actor in Hollywood named Joseph Cannon. And he reached out to me because he'd seen a story I was involved in. And I love him to death. He's been a great friend of mine. He was an English teacher. And about a year ago, he actually beat Dennis Quaid as Best Actor. So a little shout out to my friend Joe Cannon. And I also want to thank Mark Kloss, the Kloss Foundation. When I got into doing this, I forget how I made a contact with him, but he really helped me through the process of understanding the road and just dealing with the trauma. Of course, his daughter was kidnapped and later killed. But I've been very fortunate to have, like I say, Mark Kloss, Joe Cannon, and others just step in and be there to help me along the way. And you tell someone like Joe, hey, I'm going to become a teacher. And he's like, you sure, buddy? Because he knew me in other ways. And I still reach out to him, and so again, I'm just very fortunate to have people like that in my life.
Yeah, a friend and a mentor, maybe.
Very much so, very much so.
One question that I did really want to ask you, what keeps you hopeful right now?
Of course, I'm a history teacher, and my focus is with his ancient history, and really between that, I was in the military, I was in the Guard. We did a lot of deployments and hurricane, natural disasters, and seeing the worst of times of people. But the one thing I've always been impressed with is humanity's ability to still have a heart for others, regardless of what's going on in the world. And we know how difficult this world is, and things are going on. So for me, what gives me hope is just, I look back and I've had kids graduate 12 years ago, was invited to their wedding, invited to their baby shower, and then invited to their divorce.
Oh. Cyclical maybe,
right.
All the milestones.
Yeah, But the thing is with that is that was a person I invited into a program. I had a maritime program in Florida and came in as a senior, and I still keep in contact with them. So that gives me hope. It just does,
Yeah. I feel like to be in a classroom with students where you're looking at the faces of the future generations, like
exactly.
They will be change makers. They're going to go on to do incredible things. And the impact that you can play in their life is just, a tiny kernel of their story, but like you can't even imagine the places that they'll go.
And that's exactly, like I thought about the fact that the year before the pandemic, I had 6th grade class that year. Now they've all graduated high school last year. They're all they're adults, and so I look at my current 6th graders, and I'm like, it's going to happen so fast.
They'll be here before you know
just see their smiles, and you're like, yeah, you can be so much, So that definitely gives me hope.
That's beautiful. You have called teaching your greatest accomplishment. What would you say to encourage others to begin that journey if they're in a different career path at this moment?
If you have the heart to serve, truly serve, that's the most important thing. But we only pass on what we know, and the only way that you can do what you've done is you've learned from someone else and so forth. So if you've hit that point in your career where you're like, you know it, and you feel like you want to give, there's a school. And there's some kid out there sitting there in class who was me, who's in the back. Life's not perfect, and they're drawing and whatever, they're not paying attention, but they are. And they need you in the classroom to inspire them and to show them that an educator is a human being. We're not perfect. But I'll tell you, you find another career out there that is as rewarding. That comes on being like, say, at some point I'll be gone, but hopefully someone will sit and say, I had a Mr. C. So I would encourage teachers to say, be that Mr. C, Mrs. C, Miss C, M, Z, whatever your name is, be that person and step in, and you get to live on through them,
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I feel like that's all the time that we have for today. But thank you so much for joining us on our show and sharing your story. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.